Welcome back to Financial Planning Fundamentals. We are delighted today to have two thought leaders, two counselors with us who can really help us think through how we can have productive conversations about money and about those elements of how money relates to our relationships. And so we have Adam York and Dana Vince. They are co-founders of a practice here in Knoxville. Adam is a longtime friend, going back, Adam, 12, 13 years with families. And Dana, it's been a delight to get to know you here over the last few weeks, but we're excited about being able to dive in today.
Yeah, so I will go ahead and do the bios and introduce Adam and Dana to you guys. So Adam received his master's degree from Johnson University, his doctorate from the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, and is the co-owner of Healing Hearts Counseling and the board president for Relationship Builders Knoxville. He has a passion for helping couples deepen their intimacy with each other and helping therapists and churches cultivate healthy relationships. Dana served in the Army, received her master's degree from the University of South Florida, and founded Healing Hearts Counseling in 2006. Dana is a certified emotionally focused couples therapy supervisor and is passionate about both serving couples and mentoring therapists. So today, when we think about couples finance and the reality that these conversations about money with a spouse can be really difficult, we come back often to what our role is as financial advisors. And as we work with clients, we begin with a life planning process. We really want to get to know clients. We want to get to know what makes them tick. And then we proceed to financial planning and then move on to investment management. But the reality is, if we can't have honest conversations about dreams, goals, the visions for financial resources, then we really can't help build a plan, and both a financial plan or an investment plan for a couple or a family. And so over the next couple of episodes, we're going to be talking to Adam and Dana about why talking about money with a spouse can be challenging. So today, the conversation is going to be a little bit more educational. And then our next conversation will focus more about what does it look like to actually seek resolution and wholeness in those financial conversations. And as Spencer and I were talking about this, at least half of the client couples we work with, after one of the first meetings, will hear something to the effect of, we've never really talked about these things related to money. Every now and then, we'll get a couple conversations in and these things will surface, and the idea of one couple's financial goals and dreams and visions for retirement conflicts with the other. And so we know that whether it's 2 or 3 meetings in or a year in, those conversations can be really tense. Sometimes our clients just want to focus on, no, I just want you to invest the money. Tell me where to invest the money. Where the relational building piece is really critical. So Dana, as we think about conversations with money with a spouse, why is talking about money so hard?
I first want to say, Austin, Spencer, thank you so much for that wonderful introduction and inviting me into this today. I'm really excited to be able to have this conversation and hopefully provide some information that is helpful to people. But yeah, what makes conversations with money so difficult is money holds different meaning for people based on their upbringing, their life experiences, their journey in terms of how money was handled in their families growing up. For some, it might mean safety and security, and they're focused on the future and having enough. For others, it might mean freedom and independence. And so it can also give people a sense of worth and identity, right? As, for some people, being the provider and, being at one of the haves versus the have-nots. So anytime emotions and values are meaningfully attached to something, that can make things challenging, particularly if they're hidden or not acknowledged, if we're not aware of the beliefs we hold or the expectations we have around money, and if that clashes with a partner. If you have one that money means security and the other money means freedom, we might have some difficult things to work through there. So that can all add to what makes it challenging.
Yeah, that's really helpful, even just to see kind of some of those pieces of, okay, is it freedom? Is it security? Is it, I can imagine that makes things challenging. Mm-hmm. So Adam, pivoting to you for a quick question. When people are dishonest about their use or perceptions of money, what are some of the common outcomes that we see?
Yeah, I want to speak to that, and I want to piggyback on a comment you all said that at least, 50% of your clients said, hey, we haven't really talked about this. And it's really striking to me because, your clients aren't newlyweds. Your average clientele has been together for a little bit. And that's just, it's hard to talk about money, right? And so I think that just speaks to why we get dishonest is one word for it, or we get guarded or more evasive around money, is because in the short term, often there's a lot of motivations. We want to avoid conflict with our partner. We want to avoid hurting our partner's feelings. And avoiding it does work in the short term. That's the thing. It does. It does what it's supposed to do. We miss that conflict. We have a great date night. We have a good week, and we've avoided that conversation. But unfortunately, we've just delayed it, sometimes 20, 30 years down the road, until they're sitting in your office going, wow, we have no emotional skills with which to talk about this thing. And that's what I'd say is sort of the consequence about being dishonest, or maybe what I would call, sometimes there's a more unintentional being guarded about your use or your perceptions of money. One partner might they're the investor or the saver, and they're just like, you know what? I'm not going to talk with my spouse about this, but I'm just going to shuffle this away. She'll thank me for it later, right? When we're into retirement, right? She won't be upset at all that I told her no to all those vacations or extra things for the kids along the way, right? And they never are, right? Spencer, Austin, that never happens later on, right? And so that's really the consequence, and it's why we want to help couples really learn to have those conversations along the way so that it doesn't lead to the long-term conflict and or dissolution of a relationship that they really valued. But then there's often a betrayal of trust that happens when we haven't been open and honest about what's going on with money.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it seems like there's both a short-term ramification and long-term ramification for delaying these conversations. Am I hearing that correctly? That if you push anything off short-term and try to defer it and say, hey, this isn't a big deal now, it creates problems in the long term. But if you also don't look at the long term, it can produce problems in the short term. So there's almost an interweaving of the nature of the conflict where you really have to deal with it now.
Absolutely. And a part of that, and Dana and I will talk a little bit about why our attachment and our bond and our felt sense of connection to our partner, anytime we're hiding a part of ourselves, whether that's our financial part, a sexual part of ourselves, an emotional part of ourselves, we lose a little bit of that bond with each other. And that's the short-term cost there.
Yeah. Okay. So Dana, when you think about the foundations of good communication, what are some of the key things that people really need to be aware of?
I think first is just connecting with the self and recognizing and reflecting on one's own beliefs, values, experiences, like, looking back at your childhood and how was money talked about? How was money managed? Was it this thing that was fought about? Was it this thing that, we don't talk about that? How did that all play out? And how does that inform or impact how you come to your relationship with money in the here and now and with your partner? So I think that's first, is just kind of asking yourself those questions. What fears exist? What identities, expectations, those kinds of things. And then being able to then be vulnerable and openly and honestly share those things with your partner, which I think that can be really difficult, because it is, right? If you're somebody who maybe has some compulsive spending habits and doesn't manage money well, right? And maybe there's some shame around that. It's like, I don't want to acknowledge that. That might feel bad, right? So we just have to understand those things about self, be willing to be vulnerable. And then the flip side of that is being willing to stay curious to understand your partner's perceptions, expectations, beliefs, and hear them openly without judgment or admonishment, like to compassionately listen to how does your partner experience their relationship with money.
Dana, one of the things that was just striking me as you were talking there is that we could even maybe have a lot of the same values, but because even our socioeconomics might be quite different in the way that we grew up. I mean, someone who is frugal, but their father is and mother is a brain surgeon, and they have lots of income. And so they save a lot, but they have a lot more access to income. Their frugality, might play out very different than someone who, had a much lower income, set of parents. The value both people could say, well, this is a core value, but maybe the decisions, even there could be friction. Was what was striking me. Do you see as even those family backgrounds, maybe even income levels, could have quite an impact on the way decisions are made? Do you see that with people that you sit down with?
Absolutely, right? Because that really impacts how they experience the present moment. One metaphor I like to use is like an empty refrigerator is going to hit one person who grew up always having and never being without very differently than somebody who didn't know where the next meal was going to come from. To that person, the empty fridge can be really scary. And to the other person, it's like, what's the big deal? Just go to the supermarket, right? And they may not understand the impact that the not having can feel like. So absolutely, those experiences in childhood and especially if there were some traumatic ones can impact decision making for sure.
Thanks for sharing that, Dana. I think that analogy is just really helpful. And I think especially we've got some clients who their parents were very connected to the Great Depression. And so some of those things are just, you see it as a generational piece as well of grandparent experienced this, then the parents experienced it. And then either it continues down the line, or we've even seen the reverse of the child sees the parent as always having been in want, and now they have plenty, and it's almost like, well, now we just need to spend it because there's almost a looseness to money because they remember watching a loved one be in pain about not having enough. And so it's so interesting to even watch how generationally money conversations can affect people. So Adam, I would love to dive into some of this educational piece for today. So y'all have talked about attachment theory and really how that impacts couples. So can you give us kind of a broad overview of what attachment theory is and why it's so important to the money conversation?
Absolutely. I'll try to give you the Reader's Digest version of something that many tomes have been spilled over, and I'll try to do the best job I can. But in the simplest terms, as it relates to finances, we are hardwired as human beings to connect. We crave connection and we fear isolation. And that is an underlying motivation for almost all of our behavior. The radical idea that came in with attachment theory is that beyond just food and shelter, our need for connection is primal. It is deeply rooted in our psyche. It is a felt need. And because of that, we are driven to, again, avoid any disconnection and to seek that connection. What that looks like, especially, there's the childhood version of what that looks like and a vulnerable child and their caregiver. But as we grow and mature, we tend to transfer those longings towards our partner, our romantic partner. And now we seek security and connection and validation through them. And we fear being disconnected with them. So oftentimes the question running around our brain when it comes to any issue is, are you there for me? Am I important to you? Am I valued by you? Those are questions that they're constantly running around in our brain. And as you can quickly see, when those questions get applied to money, what we're looking at is not just dollars and cents and math. What we're looking at when we look at a budget is, does this budget say that I am valued to you? Does this budget say, you know me, you're connected to me, you get me? And does it say, you're going to take care of me and keep me safe? That's what we're looking for when we look at the budget. And because it's such a primal longing for that within us, our reactions are primal too. And we tend to do sort of one of two things, right? And there's a lot of nuance and complexities, but if I had to reduce it down, we either withdraw or we attack. Those are our two primal moves as human beings. I like to say we either get a club or we go to the cave. Those are our two primal moves as human beings. And what that looks like in an adult relationship, that's often very nuanced, but sometimes it'll be a criticism or a complaint, or I pursue my partner to talk about it in a way that it feels critical, or sometimes I avoid the conversation, or I get emotionally shut down in it, or I don't talk about what I'm really thinking and feeling. I'm accommodating and placating my partner, and I don't tell them what's really going on with me. That's another form of withdrawal. And what these patterns, and we could talk a little bit more about it, but again, those primal responses when we approach money are what often drive most couples into a pattern of conflict.
Yeah, I think even as you were sharing that, Adam, I started thinking about conversations I've had with loved ones where it's like, I have a tendency to be a little bit more tight maybe with my finances than my family. And so just thinking about, okay, how can I be more generous in that regard of like, how does this show that I love you and I'm for you while also still valuing what I desire? So there is constantly a back and forth of, do I value you? Do you value me? Are we mutually in this together? Like if we're both longing for relationship, there has to be a movement towards one another, where one isn't valued highly over the other. And I think that can be oftentimes really challenging and maybe what's more under the surface, if you will.
Well, and even if I chime in there, it seems like this can go in so many different directions with all kinds of different decisions too. I was just thinking about, we lost our dog, who we'd had for 14, 15 years, in December. And then the conversation was, well, do we get a new dog? Well, the financial side of that is just one component. But, there are lots of different things of, am I for you? Am I there for you? Am I, trying to, be attentive to your wants and desires? And, everyone's going to look at that decision just a little bit differently, from partners to kids to other people. But, that is so critical and so core. And yet money becomes just even one part of how we answer that, it seems like.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. So Dana, you mentioned earlier kind of some of those postures that people can oftentimes take. You're either a spender or a saver. You want freedom. You want to make sure that there's security. What are some of those key roles in finances and relationships? And can you unpack them a little bit? Or Adam, y'all can go back and forth, kind of just however y'all feel the most free to do this. But would love to hear just what are some of those key postures that people can often take, and how does that affect conversations?
So just an example of where a couple can get stuck, kind of using some of the what we sort of talked about already. If you think, and this isn't based on a real couple, but more just a gathering of experiences I've had with couples. Let's say you have the husband grew up in a poor household and he's fearful around money. So he keeps it really restrictive and contained, right? Keeps them on a tight budget. He really clings on to this identity as the family provider and is really protective of finances so that they have a secure, stable future. And when he does this, when he creates this tight budget and really limits her spending, he unintentionally sends her a message that she's not to be trusted, that she's incompetent with money, right? She might have a background that kind of hits her in a raw spot. Maybe she ends up feeling unworthy of being partnered with, like not equal. And then maybe as a sort of protest to his control, she then goes in, because I'm going to spend this money because I'm an adult and I get to do that, which then reinforces his fear, and they sort of get caught in this dance with each other that is driven by some underlying emotions. I guess another piece of that, you're talking about like roles and postures, you might have a stay-at-home parent and a working parent, and the stay-at-home parent may feel like I have less of a voice because I'm not the one bringing in an income. And sometimes that can cause some discrepancy in how we make decisions around money because we are in different roles.
Just thinking about that, Dana, with respect to a handful of conversations that we've had, that sometimes, we'll be sitting down with a couple that has been together for 3-4 decades. And there was one event that happened in the first year or two of marriage that set them on this path. and one spouse doesn't view the other spouse as trustworthy, or they gave too much to a particular loved one or a charity, or they were too generous, or they, something, they made some decision, and it's characterized so much, the trajectory of the relationship, and as you were talking about just even those roles, how easy it is for us to get kind of slotted in a groove that it seems like it's difficult to break out of. Because our intuition, our wiring, the way that we have kind of perceived the world, at least, is pushing us in that direction. But at the same time, as just hearing you describe that situation, that both spouses probably love each other tremendously, and they really are for each other, but it's just this pattern that it's difficult to overcome. How sad that can be.
Sure. I mean, yeah, when we are in an intimate relationship with another, that person has a real key way to prime our deepest fears, right? It's like, so in that scenario you're describing, it's like there's a woundedness that comes when we touch each other's raw fears. And then that protection comes online, and couples absolutely can get locked into that, not realizing, ooh, I got scared and started protecting myself. But by protecting myself, I end up shutting you out. And then we don't really have a way out of that if we can't clearly see what happened to each of us in that situation. Another thing I want to touch on in terms of positions is both people identifying what they truly value. So an example of that, I can say for myself, in raising my children, I have really valued giving them experiences. I want to take them on trips. I want them to experience different places, different things, to sort of just open their mind to the world. And so when I budget and plan, I really try to set aside chunks of money to be able to take them on trips. Like that's just really, and, time to bond as a family, that's really valuable to me. I don't have this particular conflict in my relationship, but I'll just, as an example, let's say my husband really valued storing money for their education, right? That's also a value of mine. It's like, how do you balance those two things? So if one person really values, I want to give them experiences, I want us to take trips, and the other's like, no, we really need to put money away because their education is important. Both those things are valid. Right. But if we're really locked into this one is more important than the other, I'm really holding this value, then we can really butt heads there. So being able to make space to hear what's most important to you and why, and how is that different than what's most important to me, and how can we come together and join those things in a way that we both can feel good about how we are budgeting and spending and saving our money.
Yeah, I think you're speaking so much there, Dana, but I think also in your question, Spencer, what you sort of named was there's some couples, there's this moment, there's this betrayal of trust. And there's one person probably feels some shame and guilt, and the other person feels some anger and fear. And so they often get in a manager role or whatever. The other person feels ashamed and guilty. So they go, yep, I'll submit to that. And we get in that dynamic. And in the short term, there's actually some good reasons to do that as you rebuild trust. But you see some couples, I'm sure this is what you're talking about, where they never renegotiated that as trust got built. They never got out of those roles, right? And I think that's what we want to do is we want both partners side by side as they look at budgets, as they talk about finances. We don't, I think there are some misguided understandings of submission out there that really neglect what I would talk and emphasize about the oneness in marriage. I think, again, there's respectful ideas about what that means, but I think there's misguided ideas about what that means. But about the oneness in marriage that we want to achieve is really rooted in that attachment security of, okay, yeah, you broke trust, but how do we get back to a place where this person takes a risk again? Because relationships require risk and vulnerability. And this person finds their voice again because relationships require both people to fully show up in it. And when we can take a risk and show up, then we can sort of negotiate new roles around money rather than get locked into those places. that really don't feel good to either person to be locked into those roles. The manager feels often like they're all alone in taking care of all the money, and a loneliness around that doesn't feel good. And the other person often feels like they're always controlled and judged. And neither person really wants to carry around that feeling when they look at their most important person.
Yeah. As people move through that, what's the payoff? What do you see? They get to the other side of that. What often is kind of the emotional content, or maybe an endpoint there?
One of the things we know, and I was at a large marriage conference in Washington, D.C., probably like 10 years ago. And this prominent researcher at the time, he's like, you know what the most effective pathway to building wealth is? Healthy marriage. He said there's a lot of good data around that. And like, I think there is that benefit when we can talk about everything and we can make plans together. There's a lot of evidence about how it influences actually the income generation, of one partner. Oftentimes, having a secure and bonded relationship increases the career prospects of both people involved. Like happy and healthy couples grow in their career better, right? And so there's a sort of a financial benefit to it as well. But also there's, again, just the bond in and of itself to know, okay, I have security in knowing we're not alone in this. Whether we struggle to pay a bill or we have an abundance, I'm not going to be alone in that. And that more so than money is oftentimes the ultimate security that another human being can give us, is to know we're not alone in something. So.
That's powerful. Even thinking about our story, Emily and I were in grad school in Boston, moved to Carolina for an MBA program. But as I went to interview there, I was very scared. I didn't need to be scared. I mean, rationally, there was no reason. But before the interview, we had flown down for the interview. And before the interview, Emily was just incredibly supportive and there. And I felt a level of strength and connection with her that it was so much easier to go through the interview. I'm even tearing up a little bit now because, somebody was behind me, in that. And so just, that experience of, it can translate obviously to finances, but, so much of our path has to be that we confront our fears to be able to take the steps ahead. It seems like, and if we've got somebody, in our corner like that, and if we can do that through finances, how much more powerful. So that's great.
I love what you're saying there, Spencer, because in our culture prioritizes independence and self-sufficiency. But truly what makes us independent, to be able to go out into the world and risk and put our creativity or our energy into something, is knowing we have that secure base. Like someone's got my back. And when we know someone has our back, it really does free us to go out into the world and do things, right? Like what you're saying, do hard things, do scary things, because we have this safe place to come back to, or we know that person has our back. So that's huge.
Yeah, thank you, Spencer, for just sharing that story. That's such a good illustration of, it's like when I can go into any endeavor and know, even if I flop, I got this person waiting for me on the other side. All of a sudden I'm calm. Like I can do the endeavor. I can take the risk. I can do the hard thing because I got someone who's still going to like hug me, hold me. And so let's do the hard thing. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. Well, and even one other quick story, there's a gentleman that I've known for many years, who's in his early 90s now, but he was kind of had a tense meeting with the bank, we'll just say, to keep his business afloat, one of the businesses that he started. And he said that the thing that allowed him to be able to go into that, meeting, which, tens of millions of dollars on the line, here trying to keep the business afloat with a line of credit and all these different kinds of things. He said, at the end of the day, I walked into the meeting knowing that regardless of what happened in that meeting, I was going home to the same house, to the same wife, to the same kids, having the same dinner that night. And they were not going to think any different of me, regardless of the outcome. But, again, what a powerful way to think about that with respect to finances. And, the meeting worked out well, and everybody, enjoyed the outcome. But one way or another, it wasn't going to change, who he was or who his relationship, how his relationship worked with his partner.
If you like these financial planning videos, please share it with a friend. And if you have questions, go to our website at SeriousRetirement.com. This content was provided by Retirement Planning Services. We are located in Knoxville, Tennessee. You can visit our website at SeriousRetirement.com. The information in this recording is intended for general educational and informational purposes only, and should not be construed as investment advisory, financial planning, legal, tax, or other professional advice based on your specific situation. Please consult with your professional advisor before taking any action based on its contents. Advisory services offered through Retirement Planning Services, LLC.